For many centuries, London was a dangerous place. It was a magnet for the very worst kind of people. Jack the Ripper dominated the headlines, but he wasn't the only killer around. Murder was afoot. The fear of death was everywhere. But police had their work cut out to track the culprits down. In this series, we'll be investigating some of the city's most notorious and intriguing crimes.
Female defendant.
Sexual intrigue, vicious murder, as well as the latest technology, fed the nation's insatiable desire for gruesome stories of London's dark side. Grim and dark days of the Blitz, when the nation stood together against the evils of Nazi Germany, have always been a strong influence over Britain's image of its own character. London had to withstand 57 consecutive days of aerial bombardment. The city's inhabitants had to observe the strict regulations of the Blackout, which made life so much harder for the German bombers, but also for the Londoners themselves.
It's difficult to imagine now what life was like in London in 1940, not knowing whether you were going to be alive the next day, the next week, which must have been very difficult for people to cope with.
By 1941, the city had a tremendous number of bomb sites and derelict sites. It was taking a real beating.
It wasn't so much the deaths that were the problem. It was the amount of homelessness, the number of people that were bombed out of their houses and ended up with nowhere to live, nowhere to go. They didn't know where to turn. They didn't know what to do about money. They didn't know what to do about their possessions. And so there was a lot of chaos.
There were supply shortages to exploit, empty and bomb-damaged homes to loot, and huge numbers of young men to entice with drink and prostitution. From 1939 to 1945, crime rose by over 50%. An undermanned police force struggled to cope. It was, in the words of one gangster, a criminal's paradise.
There was this great darkness at night, which gave opportunities, if you like, for people to commit crime.
People didn't know whether they were going to live, whether they were going to die. They didn't know how to behave. They started doing things that they'd never done before. So behavior became unusual. Behavior became extreme.
The Blackout was tremendously exploited by criminals because with the sound of falling buildings, breaking glass, the criminals went out at the beginning of a raid. They were going to risk the bombing because they could now start blowing safes, blowing in doors, smashing windows.
The Blackout concealed darker crimes too. In 1942, Harry Dobkin, a fire watcher from South London, was convicted for the murder of his estranged wife, Rachel. Having vanished the previous year, her body was discovered months later among the ruins of a bombed-out chapel. At first, she was thought just another victim of the Blitz. The police soon revealed his deception, however, and Dobkin was hanged for his crime in January 1943. But his was not the only act of murder disguised by the Blackout. For crime was able to thrive in this blacked-out world. And there are no crimes more notorious than those of the Blackout Ripper. On the morning of Monday, the 9th of February, 1942, Detective Chief Superintendent Frederick Cherrell, otherwise known as the Fingerprint Man, was called to an air raid shelter where the body of a young woman had been found. Frederick Cherrell had been head of the Fingerprints Department since 1938, but despite his seniority, he still insisted on visiting crime scenes himself, always armed with his trusty magnifying glass. On her neck were the telltale marks of strangulation. To Superintendent Cherrell's experienced eyes, the pattern of bruises could mean only one thing. Whoever did this was left-handed.
Fred Cherrell was one of the pioneer fingerprint men. It was a very new science for the police, and Cherrell played an important part in the development of the fingerprint department.
It's something that we take for granted today, but it was under, Fred Cherrell particularly, where fingerprints and palm prints really became a recognised expertise, and he's one of the people who have really contributed very largely to Scotland Yard's reputation.
Fingerprint technology had come a long way since its first usage in the late 19th century. By 1942, the Met's Fingerprint Bureau had thousands of records on file. But records aren't much use without something to compare them to. All police had were the body and the woman's belongings strewn across the cold floor of the bomb shelter. These were sent to Cherrell's fingerprint department at Scotland Yard for further analysis.
Fingerprints had really started to be introduced into police work because sometimes criminals would come to court and it wouldn't be clear whether or not they had a previous conviction in another court under a different name. What Frederick Cherrell did was to establish a means of identifying single fingerprints found at crimes.
Cherrell and Detective Inspector Sidney Birch had little to go on. The woman's handbag had been recovered, but it contained no clue as to her identity. They began door-to-door inquiries, armed with a photograph of the dead woman. But nobody recognized her.
He was found on Wyndham Street, just around the corner from the shelters. All the prints of the victims.
The attacker wore gloves then?
It was a cold night.
No identity card?
DDI Clare has men going door to door. Someone will recognise her. Cast your line into the water enough times
and you catch something in the end.
Though tragic, the murder of the woman in the bomb shelter seemed another unremarkable case. Cherrell could have no idea, however, what was coming. Prostitution has been called the world's oldest profession. Well, it was certainly a profession that boomed in the war period. The fragility of life under constant aerial bombardment led to a fraying of normal social constrictions, and the influx of Commonwealth and especially American troops meant there was no shortage of potential customers. As today, it was a very dangerous occupation.
I think it's fair to say that prostitution has always been with us. It hasn't been unusual throughout history, and it wasn't unusual at this point either.
People were going to have a good time, because who knows, then tomorrow they might be dead. There was that kind of attitude, perhaps, which affected how people behaved.
Street prostitution didn't become illegal until 1959, so prostitutes, of course, were out on the street. What they would do during the blackout to attract customers, they would use torches, flash that they were sort of available, they would use whistles, and of course the bomb shelters and the underground shelters and dark doorways, these were places where they can actually service their customers.
Fingerprint analysis of items found at the crime scene had revealed nothing. The killer had probably worn gloves, and they had little else to go on. But although they had made no progress in identifying the killer, one other mystery was soon solved. The police's door-to-door inquiries in the Marylebone area eventually identified the dead woman found in the air raid shelter as Evelyn Hamilton. She was a 40-year-old qualified pharmacist, originally from Newcastle. The post-mortem confirmed that she had been strangled to death. There were no defensive wounds on the body, only scratches on her shoes gave any hint of a struggle. Whatever happened to Evelyn Hamilton, it had been fast and unexpected. But what the police didn't know is that this would be the beginning of a deadly spree in blacked-out London. The days that followed would test Superintendent Cherrell and the Metropolitan Police to the limit. They would soon be faced with ever more terrifying murder scenes and a frustrating lack of evidence to go on. But their persistence meant that any mistake the killer made would be quickly seized upon. When the press became aware of the string of murders, it would spark a frenzy across the capital as another ripper had arrived in London. There was no time to lose. On the morning of the 9th of February 1942, the body of Evelyn Hamilton was assessed by Superintendent Frederick Cherrell of Scotland Yard, a man respected worldwide for his expertise in fingerprint analysis. But he had no prints to work on at this crime scene, only the contents of Evelyn's bag found next to a strangled corpse. But just as he began to work on this case, more news would arrive.
Fingerprint office. It is. I see. Thank you, Inspector. I'll be there shortly.
Across town, a terrible new crime had been uncovered. This crime, by coincidence, also involved a woman named Evelyn. On Tuesday the 10th, Cherrell hurried across town to the bedside of Evelyn Oatley. What was to be found there would shock even a man as experienced as the superintendent.
What is that between her legs? It appears to be a torch, sir.
Evelyn Oatley had suffered a brutal assault. Her killer had attempted to strangle her before cutting her throat with a razor. As she died, he abused her body with curling tongs and then ferociously mutilated her with a can opener. Once he'd finished, He left his cruelly improvised weapons on the bed.
Because there were more prostitutes, there were more clients, there was also more danger. This was not an industry that was policed in any way. It was absolutely spontaneous. It was absolutely responding to opportunity and to circumstance. And so there were a lot of dark incidents involving servicemen, involving prostitutes, involving women.
Opportunity and circumstance also fueled one of the Blackout's other social problems, that of looting.
Looting was actually a capital offence, and it was seriously suggested that looters should be shot if caught. This may be a partial explanation of why the War Reserve constables were given rifles, not so much to shoot at the enemy, but to shoot at looters. The War Reserve was set up in 1939, and these were volunteers who would supplement the police on the streets.
We think today of gun crime as being a great problem in America, and the problem is always said to be, because there's so many guns around, people use them. Well, this happened at this period as well. Young servicemen carried their guns even when they were on leave, and they used them. They used them in all sorts of different circumstances. So, for example, a young man came home on leave, saw his girlfriend in a shelter, lying on a mattress with another man. His instinct was to become furious and to open fire. There was another case where a young man at Oxford University had access to a gun from the shooting club, who went mad and started shooting people in the quad. Shot one person dead, hit another. He was found guilty but insane, sent to Broadmoor. The fact is that there was a surprising amount of gun crime happening, and it was happening because there were a lot of guns around.
The large number of guns may have been unusual for the British population, but it would have seemed second nature to the influx of American soldiers who'd arrived in the country to fight in World War II. There'd be quite a cultural clash between the two peoples.
I think there were a lot of social changes taking place, and one was the Americanization of British culture. American movies, American music. A lot of people really didn't like it at all. They felt it was very cheap. They felt that it was very superficial and it had no place in a much richer British culture. But one unusual manifestation of this was what became known as the cleft chin murder.
One of the American GIs who found himself stationed in London was a man named Carl Hulton. He met an English girl, a striptease artist called Elizabeth Jones. There was an instant magnetism, but this attraction, however, would prove ultimately fatal.
I think she was probably impressed by this great American Army truck that Hulton drove, which was actually stolen. And she had this fantasy that she wanted excitement and the life of crime. She thought, well, perhaps they could be a bit like Bonnie and Clyde, I suppose.
Instead of tackling banks, their first target was a girl riding a bicycle who Carl pushed off the bicycle and took her purse. The second was a hitchhiker.
Hulton hit her over the head with an iron bar and left her by the ditch of a canal. They took her money and again went back in the truck to Hammersmith. Fortunately, the young woman survived.
After this series of petty crimes, Hulton and Jones decided they would profit more from the robbery of a London black taxi driver. The unlucky victim was a man named George Edward Heath, whose defining feature was his cleft chin.
They asked him for a ride to Chiswick, for which he charged them 10 shillings, which was a lot of money in those days for a taxi ride. Eventually they asked to be put off, and Hulton had a loaded gun and shot him.
The two of them robbed him. They took his purse, they took his money, coins, identification papers, petrol coupons. These were all thrown out of the car, and they drove back to London.
The body was found sometime later. George Heath was identified. His car was missing, but they knew that it was RD 5353, and that was circulated to the police, who were on the lookout for it.
They were easily arrested. They were brought to trial. They ran a cutthroat defense. They both blamed the other one for what went on. Hulton was found guilty and executed. Jones was found guilty and sentenced to death, but she actually wasn't executed. Her death sentence was commuted, and actually she only died in the 1980s. But the public feeling of revulsion, of anger at these events was so great that graffiti started appearing saying that she should be executed, hang her, started appearing on walls. And this was a very, very odd little case of these two people who had, considered themselves gangsters. They wanted to live the American gangster lifestyle.
George Orwell even wrote about them in his essay The Decline of the English Murder, and wrote, "There is no depth of feeling in it. The background was not domesticity, but the life of the dance hall and the false values of the American film." He goes on, "Jones declared that she wanted to do something dangerous, like being a gun moll. Hulton described himself as a big-time Chicago gangster." He concludes by saying, "Perhaps it's significant that the most talked-of English murder in recent years should have been committed by an American and an English girl who'd become partly Americanized." The Cleft Chin murder appalled a nation that expected its citizens to band together in a time of war. But the Blackout Ripper case was a different beast entirely. 2 bodies had been found, and if the police couldn't catch the killer quickly, terror could return to the London streets, which hadn't been seen since the days of Jack the Ripper. February 1942. In the blackout of wartime London, the Metropolitan Police were investigating 2 murders committed over successive nights. The victims were Evelyn Hamilton and Evelyn Oatley. Having inspected both crime scenes, Frederick Cherrell was now analysing the instruments found at Wardour Street that were used to mutilate Evelyn Oatley's body. As of yet, there was no reason to think that the 2 murders were linked, but this was all about to change. The killer had left a clue. Cherrell discovered a greasy fingerprint on one of the objects taken from the murder scene. As he lifted the print, he noticed something.
Ah, Inspector. Sorry to bother you so late. No, I'm afraid no matches yet. But there was something. You heard about that business on Wardour Street? Yes, that's right. It's nothing perhaps, but it seems that was a left-handed job as well.
Inspector Cherrell finally had a bit of evidence to work with, a fingerprint of the killer. But now began the laborious task of going through all the records in Scotland Yard in the hope of finding a match. The police believed that if they could find a match, then they would be solving 2 murders at the same time.
The police were convinced very, very quickly, because of the way the bodies were mutilated, the weapons that were used, that they were linked.
The murderer had caused sort of particular injuries to the victims, so it was clear that there were significant things that they had in common with each other. So it was very clear that they were looking for one person who was extremely dangerous, was attacking women frequently.
Whoever the killer was, Cherrell could not find a match. For the next 2 days, no more bodies were found, but Cherrell knew a killer of such sadism would not stop of his own free will. Either the killer had died, moved on, or he had killed again, and the body lay alone undiscovered. Life continued in the capital as it always does, and on that Thursday night, 3 particular women prepared to leave their homes. One of them would not return.
Is someone there?
Mary was saved by chance. An 18-year-old night porter was passing by a doorway in St. Albans Street when he spotted the flash of an electric torch. When the young porter called out, the Blackout Ripper sprinted down the street, disappearing into the night. Mary was left barely conscious, but alive. The Blackout Ripper had been frustrated. He hadn't satisfied the overwhelming craving he had awoken within him. It urged him on. And so fixed was his mind on this one desire, he didn't realize he'd made a crucial mistake. Mary Haywood had survived an encounter with the Blackout Ripper that night. The next woman that he came into contact with was a prostitute named Catherine Mulcahy. They met in Piccadilly and travelled to her flat in Marble Arch. Once in the bedroom, he began to strangle her. She fought back and fled the apartment. Unsatisfied and driven by the desire for death, the killer returned to the streets looking for another victim. This time he would not be denied. Margaret Lowe did not look anything like the image of a typical prostitute. Other women who worked the streets agreed. She dressed too conservatively and spoke with too much refinement. They nicknamed her the Lady. The Blackout Ripper had been thwarted twice that evening, but Margaret Lowe would not be so lucky. Her friends and neighbors became concerned that they hadn't seen her for a while. Eventually, a call was made to Frederick Cherrell. He arrived to find a scene even worse than the one at Wardour Street. The killer had completed a frenzied attack. He had cut deep into the flesh of her thigh. Her abdomen had been ripped open, exposing her intestines and internal organs. The knife and the razor he had scavenged from the kitchen were left on the body. Once again, he'd improvised weapons found at the location.
What about the candle?
Found inside the victim.
They're right-handed prints.
I did notice.
You sure they're your man?
You are a right-handed man, aren't you?
Yes.
Let's say my fist is the candlestick, and this pencil here is the candle. How would you go about removing it? Naturally enough. But imagine there were wax around the base of the candlestick, holding it tight. You see? You had to use your other hand, your left hand, which is the natural thing to do for a right-handed man. But a left-hander, now,
Would use his right.
precisely. Right-handed prince.
Left-handed man.
Birch and Cherrell now had 3 murders to deal with, and the drive to find a fingerprint match was even more intense. Fortunately, the Fingerprint Bureau at Scotland Yard had been a leading innovator in this new science. But no matter how good the system had become, there was no guarantee that the killer had a previous record on file.
When the fingerprints were first started, they were used to actually identify criminals appearing in the court process. But some people thought it ought to be possible to take a finger mark left at the scene of the crime and then match it up. So they developed silver powder, which would be brushed on with a very soft brush.
You would have had to use tape. That would have been put on a glass slide. Then that would have been photographed.
Many of the major developments in the study of fingerprints had not actually been made in Britain, but in India by a man named Edward Henry, who devised what became known as the Henry classification system.
Edward Henry, who became commissioner at Scotland Yard, came up with the system that according to whether you had a loop or a wall pattern on your fingerprint, and by looking at your thumbs and fingerprints, he actually worked out a way of classifying these fingerprints, and it ended up into 1,024 different categories and permutations, and that formed the basis for how police could store and retrieve fingerprint patterns.
At that time, you have points of comparison, similarity in arches, wells and loops. It was a long process, but of course, within a very short time, you then get fingerprints being sent by wireless, and of course today, much more scientific.
Any luck?
Nothing in the records. Do you mind? It was a long shot.
Yes. One cannot help wondering what he might be doing tonight, though.
It's never best to think on that, Fred. We're doing all we can.
No. No, you're right. Let's cast our lines again tomorrow. See what we can catch. Yes, fingerprint office. Thank you. There's been another one, Birch. We're on our way.
Cheryl and Birch raced across London to a fresh murder scene. The Blackout Ripper was showing no sign of slowing down. How many victims would there be before he was finally caught? The Blackout Ripper had already killed 3 women. The bodies of Evelyn Hamilton and Evelyn Oakley had shown that the police were looking for a left-handed killer, but they were no closer to identifying their suspect. In the early hours of Valentine's Day, Superintendent Cheryl raced across London to Sussex Gardens in Paddington. The Blackout Ripper had struck yet again. The post-mortem was conducted on Margaret Lowe and Doris Journet by Sir Bernard Spilsbury produced strikingly similar results. Both women had been strangled, a silk stocking around both their necks. As they lay dying, both women had been hacked and slashed with abandon. Those investigating the crimes were worried. If the killer kept up this pace, it would create public panic and a fear that the police were unable to stop the slaughter. Despite their best efforts, they were no closer to identifying the man. On Valentine's Day, however, the press reported the gruesome twin discoveries of Margaret Lowe and Doris Journet's mutilated bodies. Inevitably, the killer was nicknamed the Blackout Ripper.
In the early part of the Blitz, the press was very limited in what it could say about certain things. So even though this was happening in 1942, at a point when the war was starting to turn in the Allies' direction just for the first time, there was still this sort of thirst, this hunger for, you know, a good old-fashioned murder story.
The newspapers picked up on this very rapidly, and I think the phrase Blackout Ripper came from the press, and it was really being reported as something that caused great fear, particularly for women who, you know, had to travel around in the dark. So you could imagine the extra fear of this man who was on the loose.
Even the Times was full of it, not just the more tabloid papers. So yes, the press were very happy to go to town on human interest, murder, crime stories, even though, you know, the war was going on around it, and you might think the war would be a much bigger story overall.
But no sooner had the story broken than it was nearing its end. After receiving so many calls to inform him of the discovery of further bodies, Frederick Cherrell was finally about to receive some good news.
Fingerprint office? What? How?
The Blackout Ripper had made a crucial error. It hadn't been at one of the murder scenes, but when he'd been thwarted in his attack on Mary Haywood. The night porter, who turned up at just the right time to save Mary, found a serviceman's respirator had been left behind by the assailant. It had the number 525987 printed on it. The night porter delivered the respirator and the injured Mary to the police station on Savile Row. Thinking at first it was just an assault they were investigating, no connection was made to the Blackout Ripper. But the police did contact the RAF and traced the respirator's owner. It was a young man named Gordon Frederick Cummins. He was 27 and had been in the Royal Air Force for over 6 years. Cummins was married, but he had a reputation amongst his fellows for drinking and womanizing. He was often out and furtively sneaking back in late after curfew. He was nicknamed the Count or the Duke because of his impeccable manners and claims of noble descent, but it was all a total sham. He was from a modest background in Yorkshire. None of his family suspected he had a darker side. After another night on the town, Cummins returned to his barracks early in the morning. The police were soon there too. They took him to West End Central Police Station, where they questioned him about the attack on Mary Haywood. Cummins was charged with assault. He was soon under suspicion of far worse. In Cummins' quarters, police had found a pen personalized with the initials of Doris Journet. They also found a comb belonging to one of his victims and a cigarette case bearing the initials of another. They were certain they had their man.
Of course. Thank you for informing me.
On the 17th of February, the day before his 28th birthday, Cummins appeared at Bow Street Police Court to be charged with the murders. It was at this stage that Cummins was fingerprinted by Superintendent Fred Cherrell. He signed his name, Cherrell noted, with his left hand. Cummins' trial began on the 23rd of April 1942. The case was interrupted when the jury was shown the wrong exhibit. The judge ruled that this compromised the jury's ability to try the case properly, and he dismissed them. A new trial with a new jury started a week later. Cherrell was to be a key witness for the prosecution. The defense's only hope was to discredit his testimony and that of the other experts involved.
What Frederick Cherrell did was to establish a much better way of linking up a finger mark found at a crime with a suspect whose fingerprints were on record. It was a careful crime scene examination by the fingerprint experts that contributed to a very large degree to that identification evidence.
Cummins appeared in his defense on the second day of the trial. He insisted on his complete innocence.
Cummins denied that he was the killer. He said the men he was sharing his billet with, they would often use one another's gas masks. They could all give one another alibis because they would sign into the register and then they would leave the billet down the nearby fire escape. But this alibi was quickly cracked, and Cummins doesn't seem to have been particularly liked by his fellow students. The evidence not only had Cummins at Evelyn Oatley's flat, inside of his gas mask there were sort of pebbles and stones and bits of ash which came from the bomb shelter where the first victim had actually been killed.
The defense was fighting a losing battle. The judge clearly gave more credence to the prosecution case, calling the fingerprint evidence an important, if not essential, link, and Cheryl probably the greatest expert on fingerprints in the kingdom. The jury retired to consider their verdict at 4 p.m. and returned just 35 minutes later. Cummins was found guilty and sentenced to death. He continued to insist on his innocence and appealed, of course, but that was rejected. London would be that little bit safer once again. The population of the capital, however, was still wary. Crime was still an issue, and although Britain, along with Allied forces, was on the attack against a retreating German army, the threat of aerial bombardment still lingered. These were turbulent times.
The Blitz was a real time of extremes. It forced people to behave in ways that they hadn't behaved in before. People behaved very, very well. They actually, found themselves with empathy for each other in a way they never had before. But they also broke rules, they broke laws, they pushed moral boundaries. So people were pushing out in all sorts of different directions, opportunities opening up for good and for bad. This was a time when people were pulling together at the same time as they were pulling apart. And it's a time that we really should remember as one of the most interesting and integral and formative periods of modern British history.
For the family of Gordon Cummins, the fact that one of their loved ones was a brutal murderer was probably too much to comprehend during this already mixed-up era. They started a mass campaign of letter writing in order to earn him a reprieve from the noose. The Home Secretary at the time, Herbert Morrison, received dozens of letters outlining supposed holes in the case. Those letters are still on file in the National Archives. Mr. Cummins himself enlisted the help of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Prime Minister's wife. All these letters received the same response. I have considered sympathetically and carefully all the circumstances of the case. I regret I have failed to discover any grounds which justify me in advising His Majesty to interfere with the due course of the law. Cummins, the Blackout Ripper, would indeed hang for his crimes. With all appeals exhausted, he was executed on the 25th of June, 1942. many centuries, London was a dangerous place. It was a magnet for the very worst kind of people. Jack the Ripper dominated the headlines, but he wasn't the only killer around. Murder was afoot. The fear of death was everywhere. But police had their work cut out to track the culprits down. In this series, we'll be investigating some of the city's most notorious and intriguing crimes.
Female defendant.
Sexual intrigue, vicious murder, as well as the latest technology, fed the nation's insatiable desire for gruesome stories of London's dark side.
Excuse me. I need to clean the room.
It was 1946, and the Second World War was over. Most of Europe lay in ruins. London had endured the relentless bombardment of the Blitz. The time had come to rebuild a home fit for heroes who were returning needing new houses and new jobs. Men were coming back who'd been trained to kill and who'd seen and done awful things. The society was grappling with the challenge of reintegrating them into a country forever changed. Adolf Hitler had committed suicide on April 30th, 1945, and Victory in Europe Day finally arrived on the 8th of May. Crowds gathered across London in joyous mood to see King George VI on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and Winston Churchill waving from Whitehall. Even the future Queen Elizabeth II joined in the festivities as she was allowed to wander incognito through the jubilant crowds. And just as the young Elizabeth would take on the role normally held by a man, so too did many other women at this time.
More women are coming into industry every day, and much more varied are their jobs. Indeed, today, women are tackling jobs that were thought impossible a few years ago.
Women's role in World War II was to replace men who had actually gone to war, which of course caused a problem at the end of the war when men came back expecting to take on the jobs that the women had been successfully doing for several years. It was the women who actually built Waterloo Bridge, and they were engaged in that heavy labour. They were replacing the men who were away at war.
But the country was now ready to return to peacetime after the most deadly conflict in human history. 1946 saw the London victory celebrations with military parades marching through the city and a nighttime fireworks display. But amongst all the cheer, some very dangerous individuals were lurking, and the burgeoning British press had plenty of sensational stories to report on.
Really, the early 20th century is starting to accelerate after W.T. Stead started to expose scandals and things like that. It opened the newspapers much more to murder, and especially after the Second World War, because the British public became very desensitized to horror because they were used to seeing bombed out sites, dead bodies. So murder became much more palatable to the British public. And of course, Fleet Street always mirrored what people wanted. The Kings of the Crime Reporters were a group called the Murder Gang. People like Norman Jock Ray of the News of the World, Harry Proctor of the Sunday Pictorial, later the Daily Mail, Duncan Webb, and they had enormous power. They were mini celebrities. Some of them were interviewed for the Picture Post and things like that, and they became like household names.
It must have been a relief for most of the returning soldiers to now be reading the newspapers rather than living with the fear of death every day on the battlefield. One serviceman, though, was returning to London, bringing all the savagery of the fighting with him. This man's charming exterior hid a dark and murderous psyche.
Now, I've been instructed by your solicitor, Mr.
Why shouldn't I plead guilty?
I beg your pardon?
Why should I not plead guilty?
You have a father and mother both alive? A younger brother too, I believe?
Mick.
Well then.
They keep asking to see me. The warders think I'm cruel for refusing, but I know they'd hate it. I've done enough to them, you see.
Who was Neville Heath? Well, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, there were a lot of people who had left the services and who had this sort of military bearing and had had many adventures in the war. Some people talked about their adventures and their exploits, and they were true. A lot of people, perhaps like Neville Heath, had a mysterious background.
Heath had a very lower middle class childhood, and he came from a very normal family. There were no major problems or anything. But from a young age, as a teenager, he showed criminal intent and really theft to start with.
Growing up, he always dreamed of being a pilot and joined the RAF when he was still a teenager. He always tried to act the consummate gentleman, inflating his background and spending money he didn't have. In order to escape bad debts, he went AWOL from the RAF.
It really started because he stole some mess funds while he was in the Air Force. So he went AWOL really to not face the music. He wanted the glamour, he wanted the image, because of course at that time servicemen were heroes, but he wasn't really cut out because he was anti-authority. He was really criminally minded from quite a young age.
I'd ring for refreshments, but the service here...
Oh, that's quite all right.
It's not exactly the Savoy.
Tell me about your first court-martial in 37. No, thank you.
You sure? Get all the smokes I need. Be pretty browned off if I didn't.
You were dismissed from the service, were you not?
The old buffers. It was a lark.
A lark?
Flew my plane under a bridge.
Really? Goodness.
It was a damn tricky thing, actually. Even to attempt it, you have to have real skill. I mean, be a real pilot. My superiors weren't so keen, of course.
No, I imagine not.
It was jolly good fun, though, mind you.
Neville Heath went on to have a lot more fun as he began a career as a petty criminal. But time after time, his golden looks and charm helped win over the authorities. It seemed with a ready excuse and the promise of future good behavior, Heath could wriggle out of anything.
He had all the wartime glamour, the blonde hair, he had the manner of a dashing pilot, a hero. He had that glamorous aura which attracted a lot of women.
He was somebody who used his appearance enormously. He was blue-eyed, square-jawed, dark blonde-haired, cleft-chinned, you know, the kind of Cary Grant thing, but with blonde hair. And he was also very elegant and very confident. And this is how he managed to hoodwink so many people.
He was a con man on quite a grand scale. I mean, the number of names he uses is Major Rupert Brooke, or else he's won the Military Cross. They're all facades behind which he can exploit a number of frauds. The Heath and fraud are linked all the way through his career.
But his luck ran out, and he was sentenced to time in Borstal, an old-fashioned type of correctional facility designed to reform delinquent youth. Unlike most, he thrived in the environment.
Wasn't so bad, I suppose. I can still get my Daily Telegraph. Well, it's rather like being back at school. Housemasters and prefects and all the rest.
I understand the governor grew quite attached to you.
Old Jack Joyce, yes. Well, he was a good sort.
He supported your application to the Air Force in '39, didn't he?
Yes, well, I was house captain, you know. Keeping all those receptions in line. Those were the novice and the new boys. I tell them, no cursing, no brawling, no acting the goat, not when I'm around. There were some real swines, but they knew where they were at with me.
Then, of course, the war came.
Yes.
You tried to re-enlist, and the Air Force rejected you.
Bloody ministry bureaucrats did. Such bull. You'd think, outbreak of the war, this great battle approaching, they'd need all the good pilots they had, but no. No. They were up there and I was down here, one of their best pilots, packed and ready. God, it was maddening. It's a damn miracle we won that war.
Heath would eventually achieve his ambition and make his way into a cockpit after a truly remarkable journey across the globe. But by the time he finally returned home at the end of the war, he had transformed into a truly vicious individual. No one was safe while Neville Heath was allowed to roam free. Neville Heath had dreams of flying with the Royal Air Force, but those dreams had been dashed due to his troubling behaviour. In September 1939, World War II had broken out, but Heath was rejected by the RAF yet again. He joined the far less glamorous Royal Army Service Corps as a private instead. He was stationed in the Middle East, but was soon court-martialed for the second time in his life and sent home in disgrace aboard the SS Multoon. But when the ship docked in South Africa, Heath seized his chance and escaped. The country offered him a new beginning. He eventually volunteered for the South African Air Force under the typically grand name of James Robert Cadogan Armstrong.
Neville Heath had a very checkered military career. He was court-martialed 3 times for using checks, defaulting on payments, misuse of uniforms and medals. So there was this mix of glamour and fraud throughout his career.
It was really in South Africa where he started to show his future modus operandi, and he posed as numerous people there. His first persona was Captain Selway, MC, Military Cross, and he would really inhabit the role. He had a limp, he had an eyeglass, he was really an actor.
Heath's acting skills had worked well for him in South Africa. He even achieved his ambition of flying missions during the war, but his true identity was soon revealed, and in January 1946 he was deported back to England. On his return to the UK, he saw one glimmer of hope, the London School of Air Navigation. He intended to become a commercial pilot. He studied hard and excelled, passing all the exams required for his license. But then, his previous mistakes ensnared him once again. His court-martial and dismissal from the RAF was discovered. Heath was told he could not become a commercial pilot.
I've made a few slips in life, yes, all chaps have. But the Air Ministry refused to let me forge ahead. There was no reasoning with them, none at all. These congenital idiots. I swear, that's what led to all this. I worked damn hard for that license.
And after that, what did you do after their refusal?
I just drifted around for a fortnight or so, until the 20th.
Heath hid the failure from his parents. The only things he had left now, the only things he was good at, were drinking and womanizing. He would pursue them both in an increasingly extreme manner. And it would prove deadly for one Marjorie Gardner. She had been born to a good middle-class family in Sheffield, but was now living in London. She was a talented artist, but always struggled for money after being separated from her unreliable husband. She was now in an on-off relationship with an alcoholic.
She worked as a film extra from time to time. She's said to have something of a bohemian lifestyle.
Her life went into a spiral, and she was really at the mercy of men she met.
She clearly enjoyed the new freedoms offered to women by the war and was drawn to the bright lights of the city. You might call her a good-time girl, but she certainly wasn't a prostitute.
We left the pub at about 8, I suppose, and then went on to the Normandy for dinner. Do you know it? It's in Knightsbridge.
I'm afraid not.
We must have left at about 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock. Then we took a cab to the Panama Club. I'm a member there. We sat down, just the two of us, and had a few drinks. We must have left at about 20 past midnight.
And returned to the Pembridge Court Hotel.
Someday we'll build a home on a hilltop high, you and I, shiny and new, a cottage that two can fill.
Do you remember anything of what occurred in the room?
No.
Nothing at all?
I woke up and she was lying there. I don't remember anything else. I've already told you all this. You know exactly what happened.
Heath may have claimed he was unable to remember what happened with Marjorie Gardner in room 4 of the Pembridge Court Hotel. But her body told the truth of what horrors had occurred. The post-mortem was performed by noted pathologist Keith Simpson. It showed that Marjorie had been the victim of a savage attack. She'd been bound and probably gagged. 17 whip lacerations were found on her body, and bruising showed she'd been punched in the face at least twice. Her suffering was eventually ended by suffocation, probably with a pillow.
He was extremely violent, a brutal frenzied attack. She had lacerations, she'd been lashed with a whip.
From a police point of view, one of the interesting things was that there were wheals across her back. And these marks or scars had a peculiar diamond pattern. And when the pathologist was discussing the case with the detective, he said, if you can find that weapon, then you'll have your man.
Neville Heath would prove a difficult man to track down, though, given his extensive experience of travelling under multiple aliases. Numerous women would cross his path as he made his way around the country. One of them would meet a gruesome end. In 1946, Neville Heath had returned home to England after years abroad during the course of World War II. He had brought back all the savagery of the conflict with him when he murdered Marjorie Gardner at the Pembridge Court Hotel. But Marjorie hadn't been the only woman he brought back to his room. Just 4 days earlier, he'd stayed there with Yvonne Simmons, who'd been part of the war effort, just like Heath.
She was staying in London at the Overseas Club. She met Neville Heath, probably impressed by this military bearing, and he put himself over as a lieutenant colonel. He took her out to dinner and persuaded her to come back to the hotel room. They spent the night in the hotel room with nothing of a violent action occurring at all.
Heath had seen his new fiancée, Yvonne Simmons, off on the train back to her parents in Worthing after they spent the night together at his hotel.
She was a pretty thing. Tall, slender. I think London rather dazzled her. You know these small-town girls.
Not quite as you do, I imagine.
You're from London now, aren't you?
Wimbledon.
My parents live there. Cambridge man.
Oxford.
I always cheer the other lot during the boat race, I'm afraid. I fancy you were a bit of a rower, though.
College 8, athletics 2 for the university.
Truly?
Yes, a long jumper a long time ago.
I don't foresee much long jumping in my future either. Short dropping, perhaps.
Not if I have anything to say about that, Mr. Heath.
The morning after he murdered Marjorie Gardner, Heath was on the run. The police would soon be on his tail, though, as he had signed into the hotel under his real name. He was travelling to Worthing to see Yvonne and her family. The amorous young man charmed her parents at the local golf club and then whisked her off to a dinner dance. The charming, war hero, charismatic facade showed no hint of the callous killer beneath. But events were playing on his mind, and after more drinks at a club after dinner, he told Yvonne a terrible secret. There had been a murder in the room they'd shared at Pembridge Court, he said. A woman had been killed.
Heath was doing everything to not tell Yvonne that he was with another woman. So he said he met a man who asked him for his hotel room key because he wanted to entertain a young woman. And he said he gave him the key. He completely cut himself out of the murder. And he was able to do that because, as well as being a psychopath, Heath was almost definitely a sociopath.
The next morning, newspapers were full of police appeals for Neville Heath to come forward. Yvonne and her parents were shocked, or who wouldn't be?
The hunt began for Heath. And it's at this point Heath does something quite astonishing. He writes to the police, giving his name, and saying that he knew Marjorie Gardner. He'd been to the same hotel with her. But He'd loaned her the key to his room. Heath had then gone back to the hotel later on and found her in the room. And he said that he'd even got the whip with which the injuries had been inflicted on her, and he would actually send this to the police.
I think in Heath's delusional mind, because he spent so many years telling lies and being believed, I think he honestly thought that the police might believe him. I honestly do think that. I think that he thought his version might be accepted.
This letter may seem strange, but Heath had form for this kind of thing. Often, when committing crimes or indiscretions, he'd written these crawlingly exculpating letters afterwards. These strange common courtesies often seemed to help him get away with things, but it wouldn't help him this time. The police pressed on with their investigation. Meanwhile, Heath was having fun. Unbeknownst to police, on the evening of Sunday the 23rd of June, Heath had arrived at the Tollard Royal Hotel in Bournemouth. He signed the register under the name Rupert Robert Brooke and told the receptionist he would be staying a week.
Thank you.
By now, the police had tracked Heath as far as Worthing. There, they interviewed the manager at the Ocean Hotel, as well as Yvonne Simmons and her parents. But beyond Worthing, however, the trail was going cold. The Tollard Royal Hotel, where Heath checked in under this false name Group Captain Brooke, was situated overlooking the beach. It's a smart hotel for the better sort. Just Heath's kind of place.
He met Peggy Waring in Bournemouth. She was a young woman that Heath was chasing, and he actually proposed to her at one point, but she refused. And there was really a cat and mouse game going on between them. She was playing hard to get. She found him attractive, but there's something about him she didn't quite trust. But they did meet several times in Bournemouth, and they sent each other letters as well.
So for about 13 days, Heath was on the loose, and there was no public identification of him. At this point, he meets a young girl called Doreen Marshall. She's 21.
Doreen had survived a terrible V-1 rocket attack that had reduced most of her street to rubble and killed 13 people. While her family escaped with their lives, the trauma left its mark on young Doreen, a burst of grey hair at her right temple.
Heath's version is that he was out walking in Bournemouth. He met Doreen Marshall and her friend, and then he struck up a conversation with them, and he arranged to meet Doreen later. She seemed to have liked him at first, but as she was becoming increasingly anxious because his behaviour was becoming very pushy. And the night porter of the Tollard Royal Hotel where Heath was staying witnessed her becoming a little bit panicky.
This would sadly be the last time anyone but Heath saw Doreen alive.
I have no recollection of going near the chine. Next thing I remember, I was lighting a cigarette. As I went to flick the match away, I saw blood on my hands. I had left the hotel with her. I knew that. But where she was, or what happened, I was on the beach, on the sand. How late it was, I don't know. I didn't know what to do. I washed my hands in the sea and then walked back along the beach to the hotel. It was quiet. There was nobody about. I knew something dreadful had happened.
Doreen Marshall's sudden disappearance raised suspicions about the mysterious character of Rupert Brooke, who'd only just arrived in Bournemouth. The police, who were hunting for the killer of Marjorie Gardner, would soon realize that Neville Heath and Rupert Brooke were one and the same. When Heath was finally captured, his extraordinary and frightening life story would be revealed to both his legal counsel and a fascinated public, who were fed all the details by the burgeoning British press. Neville Heath was staying at the Tollard Royal Hotel in Bournemouth under the false name Captain Rupert Brooke. Doreen Marshall was at the hotel lounge as well, but she was now missing.
Captain Brooke?
When Heath went back to the hotel that night, he used a ladder to get into his hotel room. And when the porter came up to check, they saw his shoes there. And at breakfast the following morning, he told everybody that he'd played this prank on the doorman. But in fact, that created an alibi in his mind over what he had done and how he had attacked Doreen Marshall.
Fears over Doreen Marshall's disappearance were growing, and on Friday the 5th of July, the manager at the Tollard Royal Hotel received a telephone call from his counterpart in town at the Norfolk Hotel, where Doreen had been staying. She had last been seen in a taxi heading for the Tollard Royal.
The hotel staff at Bournemouth were very concerned about Neville Heath, or Group Captain Brooke, as he had signed himself in the register under. And because they knew that Doreen Marshall was missing, they knew that Heath had had some connection with her. They said, well, you really should go to the police, which indeed he did do.
The man police believed was Group Captain Brooke seemed a helpful witness. Calm, courteous, and upfront, with nothing to hide. There was no reason to detain him, nor any reason to think there was anything wrong with Doreen's disappearance. She was on holiday after all, and might have made an impromptu trip. She was expected to show up eventually, but a certain resemblance was nagging at their memory.
Inspector Constable Souter actually had a photograph of Neville Heath, which had been circulated to the police forces, and said, well, actually, we want you to stay here just to check for a bit longer until my detective inspector comes.
The Bournemouth police were under pressure to release the man, though. Wasn't he a gentleman? An honest serviceman who'd given his word? Their superiors wanted him freed, but D.I. Gates couldn't shake the conviction that this was the man the entire country was looking for. All they had to do was delay long enough till the information came through. But Group Captain Brooke had already given them a bit of information they could look into. He had told the police he was from an aerodrome in Leicester. He even gave them the name of his chief, a man called Walters, Well, this was something they could look into right away.
Eventually, Reg Spooner from Scotland Yard came down and they identified Neville Heath as the man they wanted to interview and arrested him for the murder of Marjorie Gardner. In the course of searching Neville Heath, they found a number of things. One was a rail ticket that Doreen Marshall had used. Another in his luggage was the whip and some blood-stained clothing, and there was some hair on the whip that corresponded with Marjorie Gardner. And so it was very clear at that stage that Neville Heath was clearly connected and had possession of the murder weapon.
Spooner charged Heath with the murder of Marjorie Gardner. There was still, though, no sign of Doreen. It was the coverage of Heath's arrest in the press that helped lead to the discovery of the body of Doreen Marshall. A young waitress named Kathleen Evans thought she was just taking her dog for a walk. But the next day, when she read the papers, her mind went back to the strange swarm of flies she had encountered. She revisited the location with her father. They discovered the clothing and informed the police. Doreen's body was soon found.
It was found concealed in some bracken. She'd been stripped naked, her hands tied behind her back. She'd been savagely beaten. Heath had almost certainly stripped himself naked before the attack because there was so much blood. Then, having committed the attack, he'd gone into the sea, washed himself, and got rid of the knife.
Charged with the murder of Marjorie Gardner, Heath's trial began on the 24th of September 1946. This wasn't his first appearance at the Old Bailey. It was here in 1938 that he'd been sentenced for robbery. But these charges were on an entirely different scale.
Why should I not plead guilty?
Mr. Heath, there is no kindness to your family in throwing your life away. A guilty plea is accepting that you were in your right mind when these murders were committed. Do you want it to be said that your parents raised a man to commit such crimes? Is that how you want Mick to think of you, and he to think himself as a child of the same parents?
Mick's different, he knows better.
But it's only human to wonder, is it not, what he too might be capable of. This is your opportunity. Your one opportunity to prove to Mick and your parents that the man who committed these vile murders is not the real Neville Heath they know. That would be a true kindness.
All right. Put me down as not guilty, old boy.
Heath's counsel, J.D. Caswell, had developed a reputation for handling infamous murder cases that generated a lot of press attention at the time, but nothing quite like the story of the lady killer, Neville Heath.
I think the way the press covered Heath was wrong. I know for a fact that circulation of the Sunday Pictorial increased by about 40%. There was a massive interest in Heath, and it certainly increased Harry Proctor's stock in Fleet Street. Proctor really got at the nitty-gritty of Heath's story from prison. You know, he spent time with him in prison, he spoke to him, so he got the exclusive. And Heath was very much shown as a lady killer in the jaunty way of that word. He was dashing, you know, he was the airman. He was almost seen like a Terry Thomas type character. But the problem is what he did was monstrous.
With the evidence against Heath so overwhelming, his defense did not deny that he was the killer. Instead, they claimed the murders were proof of insanity. They did not hide Heath's previous wrongdoings. Instead, they revealed them in court, arguing the crimes were steadily escalating ones, a progressive mania that finally led to murder.
I think he was faced with a situation that a lot of murderers would have faced, that actually they were facing the death penalty if they were convicted. If they could prove insanity in some form, then actually they stood a lot better chance of being reprieved.
You might think he was insane, but the thing is, in legal terms, he wasn't insane under the M'Naughton rules, which states that you have to not know what you're doing is wrong at the moment of death, and that's very difficult to prove.
A number of people in his situation did actually try to plead insanity with, you know, a wide variety of different success rates.
And the problem with Heath was that he made so many efforts to cover up after both murders, and he told so many lies that it showed that he did know what he was doing was legally wrong, if not morally wrong.
Will you be calling me to give evidence?
I do not think at the current time that would be our best course of action.
Concerned I won't see him mad enough for them, Mr. Caswell.
We're not contesting your involvement in the murders. It is a question of your state of mind, and on that we will of course present the jury with expert opinion from the most eminent authorities. A doctor has been recommended. He practiced psychotherapy at Broadmoor. I'm arranging for him to visit. He shall want to conduct several interviews with you.
Their key witness was Dr. William Henry de Barg Hubert, a specialist in psychiatry. It was a disastrous appearance. He ended up suggesting that all crimes are excusable if the person can't help themselves. Even Heath dismissed his own witness. He passed a note to the defense insisting he'd never suggested being excused on the grounds of insanity. Indeed, it appeared that at this point, Heath had a death wish. If so, the wish was granted. How do we account for the crimes of Neville Heath? His life had always been one of lies and scams, but somehow, whatever the scrape, he always managed to wriggle free. After the war, though, he became a deeply twisted and vicious individual. But he maintained his playboy facade to the very end. When he was offered the customary glass of whiskey to settle his nerves before execution, he calmly replied, "Under the circumstances, you might make that a double."